Hi, I'm Mike from 1A Auto. We've been selling auto parts for over 30 years.
Open the hood, we have to pull the release inside the car. It's just inside, right around your left knee on the driver's side. You need to release the secondary or safety release. Just kind of feel around for it. This one is right here. Squeeze up. Underneath this plastic cover, there is a secondary cover that is actually covering all of your valve train components. And where that meets the top of the engine's head, there is a gasket that seals and holds in the oil. When this gasket fails, you'll get a bunch of oily residue leaking out. And because oil is sticky, dirt and debris will stick to it. So this is the #1 easiest way to tell that you need a valve cover gasket. It's very obvious that this is leaking. However, some other things that would be a problem attributed to a leaking valve cover gasket would be oil loss. So if you're checking the oil regularly and the engine oil keeps going low, it could be leaking from the valve cover gasket. Also, if you've got a rough running or engine misfire, the valve cover gasket also seals around where the spark plugs go in to the engine. So there could be oil leaking down into the spark plug openings and then leaking past the spark plugs. They'll give you a rough running and misfire. So the valve cover gaskets are typically near the exhaust manifold. So if there's oil leaking, this exhaust manifold is of course hot when the engine is running. The oil will burn off. You'll get a burning oil smell. Sometimes you'll even see smoke coming from underneath the hood and a faint whiff of burning oil. Worst case scenario, if this is really leaking very badly, you could cause a fire. This one is leaking quite badly, so it needs to be changed. I'm going to remove these 2 top nuts that hold on the appearance cover. They are 10mm, so I'm using a 10mm socket, ratchet, and extension. They should just thread off real easily. There's our appearance cover. It's got some foam inside. That's just for noise. Just keeps the noise down from the valve train. There is some oil that's been spilled from when the oil has been added to the engine. It's spilled underneath the oil fill cap, but the majority of this oil is coming from a failed gasket because you can see the seam between the valve cover and the engine head. So the gasket seals between that seam. It goes all the way around. We can see some oil leaking in the back. These are your 4 coil packs. We need to disconnect the electrical connectors, then remove the 10mm bolts that are holding them into the head, and we can pull them right out. Push down on the lock and remove the connector. These can be brittle, sometimes they break. The lock does. This procedure will be the same for the other 3. Use a ratchet, extension, and 10mm socket to remove this 10mm bolt. Put this bolt aside. Now we need to move the coil. You might have to wiggle it because there is a seal in here, and just break it free. Once it's free, it should come right up. There's our coil pack. After removing the coil pack, you can see that part of the valve cover gasket that goes around the spark plug opening has begun to leak, and there's oil now in the spark plug openings. And eventually, if this gets bad enough, it can cause a rough running condition and a misfire. Remove all the coils. So pretty interesting. This cylinder and this cylinder are dry. but this cylinder and this cylinder have oil leaking in them from the valve cover gaskets, even though it's all one piece. I'm going to unbolt this 10mm bolt that's holding on this harness bracket. I'm going to kind of be gentle with this harness. That'll be okay. I'll have enough space to maneuver the valve cover out. So this harness can stay right here. I just needed it loose from the valve cover. I'll loosen this 10mm bolt holding on the harness. I might just need to hold that out of the way to get to these, but that will stay right there. I'm going to take this vent hose off. Take a needle nose pliers, squeeze the spring clamp. Just kind of push it up the hose. There it is. So once it's over that, take a right angle pick, just try to work it under the hose here while pulling at the same time. Sometimes you can get under here. It helps to break the seal. Try to work around the hose. Try to break the seal. Eventually it'll come off. I'm going to remove or loosen the clamp on the PCV valve. Might be able to squeeze it or use needle nose pliers, but I have to push it up and over, just like that. You can work that hose off the PCV valve. There are 6 bolts around the perimeter of the valve cover and 2 nuts on studs, and then 2 bolts in the center. So it's a total of 8 bolts, and then these 2 nuts. Once you've removed all those, the valve cover should come off. I'm going to start with the one in the back corner. You can see it's covered with some oil. Reach back here so I don't drop it. These are 10mm head bolts. I'm using a 10mm socket and ratchet to remove them. I'm just going to take note of where I took these out of in case they're different lengths. This one is in the back corner. I'm going to go along the edge and find all the bolts. So these 2 bolts are different. They're much longer. They have washers on them. With all the bolts and the nuts removed, you need to take the valve cover off. It might be stuck on there. So I'm going to remove the oil cap. The oil cap side. Try to reach my fingers in here. Pull up. Might need a little persuasion, so I'm going to use a rubber mallet. You don't want to damage the aluminum. I'm just going to tap on it. There it goes. Lift this out of the way. Gotta get the cover off of these studs. And there it is. And actually, the valve cover gasket didn't come up with the valve cover. It stayed stuck to the top of the engine. Sometimes the valve cover gasket can stick in this little channel. You'll have to dig it out carefully to not nick the surface. But it's so dried out and baked on, it actually stuck to the head. This valve cover gasket has lost all its elasticity. It's basically turned into like, when they get really old, they just turn into like a hard plastic. And that's why it's not sealing anymore. So So I should be able to just carefully peel this all off. Hopefully it doesn't disintegrate too much more. If you look in the center, you can see this is all supposed to be one piece. It's actually broken here. So who knows where that part went? It looked like this. It must have got pushed in the engine and then ground up. It's just kind of rubber. Luckily it's a lot softer than the metal in the engine. See, that broke right apart. It's totally brittle. So I'm just gonna carefully remove all this stuff. Try not to drop too much of it in there or any of it. Just kind of go along, break it free. This is actually easier that it's stuck to the head. A lot of times this gets stuck in the valve cover and then it takes a lot of work to dig it out. I'll lift that out one piece. We're gonna leave this engine alone for a few minutes. Just gonna put some towels over the top of it. This will prevent anything from falling into the engine while we replace the valve cover gasket in the valve cover. So normally you take off a valve cover and this gasket will remain stuck in the groove. You know, ours came out stuck to the engine, so it would be stuck in this groove and it's all dried out. You're gonna have to come in with a small pick or something and try to lift it up. And then you're probably gonna wanna use some sort of plastic prying tool because you don't wanna damage the aluminum. You wanna be really careful with using a flat-bladed screwdriver. But you're basically just gonna have to get in here and just work it out if it's stuck, and that can happen sometimes. Luckily this one is all right. It's gonna come right out for us. So we'll just remove it and throw it away. Of course, there's the middle part that is broken. So we're gonna take those out too. And the part we were missing on top of the engine actually stuck to the valve cover. So remove that too. Now the next step before we install our new gasket, we want to clean out all these grooves so that it seals well. So just take a paper towel and get in there. You can use that plastic tool and we're just going to clean in here. If need be, you can take some brake parts cleaner, spray it in here. Take your paper towel. And just repeat this all the way around, all the openings, and then you'll be ready to install the new gasket. Before you reinstall your valve cover, with it off the car, it'll be easy to clean. So we're gonna wipe down all this excess oil. You're gonna need some paper towels. You can start by wiping off the heavier stuff with a paper towel. A lot of it might come off. If you need be, you can use some brake parts cleaner and the rag. Or you can use some like dish detergent and like really scrub it down because that'll cut the oil and grease, but then you'd have to dry it off really well before you put it on the engine. But basically just clean this all off just so it looks nice and fresh like that. So when you put on the new valve cover gasket and you reinstall the valve cover, if it does leak again, you'll be able to tell. Since we've got a parts washer available to us, we're going to clean off the valve cover with a parts washer. This is our old dried out and destroyed valve cover gasket from our vehicle. Here's our brand new one from oneauto.com. The rubber is nice and soft and it will seal. See, this is old, it barely moves. In fact, when you bend it, it just cracks. So this is not sealing anymore. It's letting all the oil escape. This nice brand new one from Auto will stop your valve cover leak and fit great for you. Now our valve cover is clean. We'll take our new valve cover gasket. It can only go in one way. Lay it in place. And just kind of push it down. It'll sit into place. That should stay in place while I install it. I'm gonna pull these rags out of the way now. Take our valve cover. I've got to capture it over these two studs first before it will sit down. I'm also gonna have to slide it underneath this little harness holder. So I'm gonna lift up, get this underneath. Try to capture that there. And then spin it backwards a bit. Pull this harness out of the way. Now I'm going to capture these two nuts right here. Right now I'm just going to thread everything in by hand. I'm going to put the two larger bolts that were from the center. I'll get those started. Now the rest of the bolts are the same, so I'll just go around and install those. I'm going to start with the center two bolts and tighten them down evenly and work my way out from the middle. These are steel bolts going through an aluminum valve cover into an aluminum head, so I don't want to over tighten them because you can crack the valve cover or strip the bolt holes in the head. And I basically just want to compress the valve cover gasket enough so it seals. And I kind of feel it, those are getting tight, and then I'm going to stop. I'll do the same over here. Now I'm going to work my way outwards. Reinstall this bolt that was holding this harness down. It's a really small bolt, it's only holding this bracket on, so just give it a little bit of snugness and that's tight enough. I'll lay our harness back down for the coil packs. And I'm also going to install the small bolt that was holding it. Just a small bolt again going into the aluminum head. As soon as I feel it get tight, I will stop. I'll reinstall the coil packs. Gonna put them in place right now. Come back, put the bolts in. I'll get the bolts in here. Tighten these down. This is just a steel bolt going into the aluminum head to the aluminum valve cover, just to hold the coil pack in. So as soon as you feel it get tight, just stop and reconnect it. Unfortunately, our plug was really brittle and the lock broke off. So I'm just gonna push that on there. Reinstall the oil cap. Put our PCV hose back on. Clean it back over. You may need to use pliers. I was able to get that with my fingers. Put this vent hose back on. Clamp back over it. Now just do your best to clean the oil that's run down the side of the head here from the leaking valve cover gasket. You can use whatever degreaser you prefer or brake parts cleaner. And then I'm going to take a rag and just wipe it up as best I can. I'm not going to worry about it too much. It would be nice to have it clean so you could see any potential leaks if they do happen again. You also want to clean up anything that might be dripping on the exhaust and causing a burning oil smell. Now I can reinstall the plastic engine cover. Wiped it down with a rag to clean some of the dirt off of it, make it look a little nicer. Get it lined up over those studs. It'll sit right down. Reinstall the nuts. You can actually just do these hand tight. They don't need to be super tight. Job is complete.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at oneauto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.